Conservatives' prospects. Aaron Bastani, you're not a big fan of Keir Starmer or of this leadership of the Labour Party, but surely you have to admit they're doing something right.
Well, they've done very well here, but I don't think what we're saying right now, I don't think it's a resounding endorsement of Keir Starmer. I think there's a few things at play. You've obviously talked about it a great deal this evening. Conservative voters are staying at home. And I actually think, as you said in Kingswood, this is a OK result for the Conservatives, given the massacres we've seen in the last 6 months to a year. And that difference between that margin between Labour and the Tories, of course, was slightly smaller than the Reform vote. And I think in a general election, were that constituency still there, the Tories would probably keep it. The big thing, we've not mentioned this, the big thing is interest rates, right? If interest rates have been cut by 0.5%, and if we'd just seen a little bit of economic growth rather than a recession, these are the things that are going to make the difference in a seat like Kingswood at a general election.
But Aaron, people don't necessarily have month-by-month changing rolling mortgages. People will have fixed-term mortgages for perhaps 2 years, meaning that if interest rates come down by 0.5% or whatever, there'll be a lot of people who are going from mortgages at sort of 2% interest to mortgages at maybe 4% interest, which is still doubling the interest rate. I mean, it's less bad than it would have been, but it's still a situation for them that is getting worse than it was before, even if interest rates are down.
Sure. The point is the Tories haven't got a story right now. They haven't got a story in terms of inflation being where they need it to be. It's fallen, but by the way, it's ticking back up again. Mortgage rates and interest rates generally are still very high. Growth is nowhere. They thought maybe we can pull a rabbit out of a hat with regards to tax cuts. That's now been spiked. We're going to see potentially a 2p tax cut. That's not going to happen either. So it's really hard to see how, apart from the over 65s, the people who've bought their houses out outright, they're going to vote for the Tories regardless, generally speaking. Take those out of it. For the working age population, the Conservatives have to offer them something. Doesn't mean they're going to vote Labour, by the way. They just might not bother. And right now, between interest rates, between inflation, and between probably an absence of tax cuts, there isn't very much. I think, by the way, we had the pleasure of seeing Rishi Sunak on Monday in Darlington. Very competent man, very genial, very sweet. But look, if your mortgage bills are up £600 on a year ago and your energy bill is double what it was 3 years ago, that's not going to cut the mustard. And I think Starmer isn't infusing people, but I think Kingswood in particular is interesting because he probably can just get over the line.
Sorry, who can just get over the line?
I think this is an indication that Labour will probably get a majority on that result, and of course it's not even going to exist next time, of say 30 to 40. The big variable is...
Rather than a 1997-style watershed.
Yeah, the big variable is Reform, and we'll see about this second result in a minute. Look, if Reform get a national vote of, say, 15%, more than UKIP got in 2015, which would be extraordinary, then the Tories are in big trouble. If we do have some kind of rapprochement like we saw between the Brexit Party and the Tories in 2019... different story.
But again, we're talking about this idea of splits on the right. And Mark, there used to be 5 families. Some people now say that there are 6 families. You head one of them. Is the right just too divided?
No, because there's not an electoral divide there. I think what hurts a political party is when you get divisions around personalities. You know, one faction trying to dislodge the Prime Minister, another faction rallying behind him, different candidates positioning. That's damaging. I don't think there's any problem in a large mainstream political party having a whole bunch of people trying to put forward slightly different and nuanced analyses and views. That's what PopCon's about. We've made it very plain we're not trying to get rid of Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister.
Is that why you disinvited Simon Clarke from attending your launch event?
Yeah,
Simon Clarke, of course, the former Cabinet Minister who called for Rishi Sunak to resign.
That's right, yes, that is why we disinvited him. I've got a great deal of respect for Simon. I mean, I know Andrea Jenkins as well has called for Sunak to go. They're entitled individually to make those calls, but I think it's that sort of stuff that undermines confidence in a party. Not that you've got a group called One Nation and another group called the Conservative Growth Group and another group called PopCon. So the electorate don't care about that being divisive. It's when you marshal yourself as a circular firing squad. That's, I think, supremely unhelpful. And actually, for all of the poor opinion poll rating for the Conservatives, I think there's quite a lot more intellectual vigour on the right of British politics at the moment than on the left. Who are the 5 or 6 families in the Labour Party? What are the big intellectual discussions the Labour Party are having? Not very many of them.
Although, Mark, what some people might say is that this was the criticism of many people of Tony Blair, that he squashed dissent that he forced everyone to read from a little pledge card, that we had soundbite politics, politicians all sounding the same, and all of those criticisms might well have been true, that there was very little dissent and it was all squashed out. But it was electorally successful.
It was, but under Blair, you wouldn't have seen this fiasco happening in Rochdale. I can tell you that. That would never have occurred under the Blairite Labour Party. The vetting, I'm not privy to what exactly the vetting processes are that the Labour Party's got, but they're going to have to be completely overhauled once again. So that doesn't suggest, well, you can't necessarily say it's ill discipline. I mean, they ummed and ahed about it, but it suggests that the party machine is not necessarily the slickest and most focused it could be. So, look, I mean, the Labour Party's well ahead in the opinion polls. There's no doubt about that. I think on all historical comparisons, the Conservatives will require the biggest swing back since democracy began if they're to prevail at the next election. But it's very febrile out there. It really is. And I know everybody talks about the undecideds and the don't knows, but I think there's a vast swathe of people who have not made up their mind one way or the other. There's a heck of a lot to play for. That might play into Labour's hands, or the Conservatives, or Reform, or indeed one of the other small parties.
Aaron Bastani, what do you make of that?
Well, I would say that there are a fair few fiascos under Tony Blair and the Labour Party. Of course, there was the Frank Dobson, Ken Livingstone farrago in terms of the London mayor. So, you know, his control of the party machine wasn't always top-notch, although before 1997 it certainly was. What I would say is, in terms of the five families in the Tory party, you can do that. You can have that wonderful environment and atmosphere of academic and intellectual debate if you have a charismatic leader at the top who's calling the shots. The Tories don't have that. OK, if you've got Harold Wilson or you've got Margaret Thatcher, you can have those conversations, and when push comes to shove, the gaffer decides. The Tories do not have that, and I think that's what they're lacking the most. Look, Gordon Brown in 2010 gets 28% of the vote. There's a hung parliament. That can happen for the Tories. It can happen. You have to have a very efficient vote, right votes in the right places. You've not got the person to do it. I look at Rishi Sunak and I think, great Chancellor, great Finance Secretary, great Under-Secretary to the Treasury, right? I do not think PM, and that's no...
Well, Aaron, you just described him as sweet, which I think could be damning with faint praise, to put it mildly.
It's not meant to be an insult to him, and I think, finally, I'll say this. The problem for the Tories is we can talk about ideas and we can talk about polling and resources and the media. They don't have the personnel. They do not have the talent on the Tory benches. Ben Habib, who's running for the Brexit Party.
I keep doing that.
For Reform. Ben Habib, I've met him many times on here. Very impressive man, more impressive than 90% of Tory MPs.